So you've just bought your first TIG welder. Now what? You want to know how to set it up, what all the knobs and buttons mean, how to connect up your gas, what gas you need, and everything else that you need to know so that you can start TIG welding. Firstly, the TIG welder that I have here is a DC TIG welder, meaning it only works in direct current, which is perfect for steel and steel alloys. Yours might be slightly different, being an AC/DC model, but that doesn't matter. The basic setup is the same. Also, mine is button TIG only, meaning that you tell the machine when to start welding via a button on your TIG torch. Yours might have a pedal, but again, the setup will be similar, so you'll still be able to set up your machine with this tutorial. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is plug everything in. Your machine would have come with a bunch of different wires, but don't worry, we'll explain what they all do. Firstly, you'll have some that are already wired in to your machine. Now, one of them will be your mains power cable. Mine is for domestic use, so it has a 240 volt plug on it, meaning that it's single phase. Yours might be 3-phase, meaning it will have a different plug to this. That basically means that you'll be working from an industrial unit that has a 3-phase connection that you can plug into. The next one will be your gas connection tube. Now this is already connected to my machine, and this is what connects directly to your gas cylinder, but we'll come to that later on. At the front of the machine, you'll have a bunch of different connections. Now, 2 of those connections have very similar ports, so this part is very important. With your machine, you would have had 2 leads, and those will have some male connectors that look like these. One of them is for your torch, and the other is for your earth clamp. Now, it's very important that you get these the right way around, because otherwise it will affect how your machine welds. First things first, connect your earth clamp. This is what grounds your workpiece. Seeing as you're doing TIG welding, most likely you'll be working off a table. So your table should be made from steel or have a steel topper, or copper if you're very wealthy. So if you're welding something that's directly in contact with the table, this earth clamp can be clamped to the table. If not, maybe you're welding something larger, some box section, something of that nature, then you can clamp directly to the workpiece. Then these connectors have sort of a key kind of shape to them, and you need to plug them in as so. So on the front of your machine, the 2 connectors that look similar in my case, they might look slightly different in yours, but usually they're the same. You want your earth lead to be in the positive side. So they'll be marked, one will have a plus, one will have a minus. Put your earth lead in the plus. This is because we want to weld in a setting called DC negative. That means the lead to your torch can then be plugged in the other side. Because your torch is technically a conduit, not a cable, it is actually a collection of other leads and tubes. The main one is to carry the current. That's the one with the key configuration. So we'll go ahead and plug that in now. So the key part goes in like that, and then you twist it, and that locks it into place, just like you did with your earth lead. Then you should have a control lead like this. So this will have some pins in it or some prongs, and you'll have to get them oriented so they fit inside the female side. Be careful not to bend any of these electrical prongs, because this is what sends the signal to the welder when you want to start or stop welding. So if you don't have button TIG, this will be where you plug in your pedal. Mine's got a little groove on the top just to make sure that everything is lined up correctly. I stick that in like that, and then it will click into place. Lastly, but very importantly, you've got your gas lead. Now this connects to the front of the welder like so, and this is because your welder will control your pre and post flow, and when your gas is released when you initiate welding. So that's why it runs through the machine and not directly from your gas cylinder. Now this will have a little nut on there, so make sure it's screwed in place and it's nice and tight, but not too tight. You don't want to go wearing out any of the threads, but just tight enough so you can pop it on hand tight till you can't turn it anymore, and then just do it a quarter turn or so just till it bites and offers some resistance, and that's it. This is my welding gas cylinder. Now yours might look slightly different to this because mine is an Albi setup. Now what this means is basically I'm not renting a cylinder off a company and paying an annual fee, as I actually own this cylinder myself and I just pay for refills. You can check with your local supplier whether they are an Albi distributor and you can purchase and own your own cylinder like this, or often you'll have to rent one. Now when people first start, they can get quite intimidated about going in and renting a cylinder over because they aren't really sure what they're talking about. All you need to do is go in and explain your situation, tell the people who work there on the desk that you're new to welding and you're looking for a pure argon setup for TIG welding. Then they will go through the cylinder sizes that you can rent. If you're just starting out, you can start small with a 20 litre, and if you're finding that you're running through a lot of gas, if you've got a lot of work on or you're doing a lot of projects or practicing, then you can upgrade. This is a really small cylinder, it's only 13.4 litres. The benefit to an Albi setup is that it has its own regulator built in, so you haven't got to buy any other accessories. Aside from this little connection collet right here, this allows you to connect directly onto the Albi system like so, and then you can connect through the threads directly to your welder. On your regulator, you'll have some numbers, and what that basically is telling you is the flow rate, how many litres per minute your gas is exiting the tank. It'll also have a basic on-off switch. It'll have a pressure gauge. This is telling you how much pressure is in the cylinder. They fill these Albi ones up to 300 bar, so it's reading close to that now because it's nearly full. One thing that you need to do is be very careful with your gas cylinders, as you don't want it falling over. We've all seen that Mythbusters episode. So ensure that you secure it to your table or chain it to a wall. I usually just wrap a bungee cord around it like that, just so it can't fall over. Now, of course, if you have a welding cart, you can secure your gas cylinder to that. Just make sure that it's chained to the back so it doesn't fall over, especially when you're moving it around. Another thing that new welders are often tempted by are these small disposable gas bottles that you can buy in hardware stores. They seem reasonably priced, however, there is not a lot of gas in there. The lines often leak and bleed, so you waste a lot of gas. And trust me, in the beginning process of welding, you're going to want to be constantly practicing in order to gain momentum and pick up the skill. And those small disposable bottles just don't contain enough gas. You're just wasting your money. Don't bother. Okay, remember that gas lead end from earlier with the connector on it? This connects directly to your gas cylinder. So if you've got an Albi system, you'll have to buy a separate little connector like this. This is because they don't have a standard thread system like the rented cylinders. And that just screws on like that, and then you just tighten it up with a spanner. And then this directly connects onto your gas cylinder like so. Now, I know what you're thinking, Andre, I don't have an Albi cylinder, I've got a standard rental. So how do I set that up? Don't panic, because I'll show you. So I don't have a cylinder of argon, and it is argon that you'll definitely need, especially if you're TIG welding in DC negative, as you'll probably be welding mild steel or a steel alloy like stainless. Sometimes, in some cases, you will use other gases or gas blends, but these are special cases. Typically, you'll be using 100% pure argon. Now, this is not that, but for demonstration purpose on how to set up a cylinder, this has all of the standard connections and fittings, and it will probably resemble yours if you've got a rental. So the setup will be the same, so I'll show you on this. So your setup with your rental cylinder will look like this. It'll have an open close valve on the top, and it'll have this nice big threaded area ready to receive a gas regulator that looks like this. It has some dials on there. One side shows you how many litres per minute you are outputting from your tank, and the other shows you how much pressure is inside the tank itself. And it shows you this in PSI and bar. So depending on how full your tank is when you purchase it will depend on what number this reads out as full. So make a note of what your tank is filled to. It might be 190 bar, for example, and that means when it reads 190 on this dial, that means it's full. Fitting a regulator like this is really simple. All you have to do is mind the nipple on the end. This goes inside these threads like so. Just hand tight for now. Start screwing up. You can then just nip it up with a spanner. Just like that. On the other end of the regulator, you'll have another threaded piece. Add your line directly to your regulator like so. However, there is another piece of equipment that you can use in order to improve this setup, and that is a flow meter. Now, flow meters come in different types. I've got two here. This one has a little ball bearing in it, and this one has like a plug inside. The way that these work is they fit in between your gas line that goes to your welder and your gas regulator, just like that. This side connects on like so. This provides a visual cue and it allows you to tune how much gas is leaving your cylinder regulator when you weld. It also gives you that nice visual indication. Now, it provides a bit more of a steadier flow than a regulator alone, and I would recommend that you use one. And yes, you can use one with an Albi cylinder. Connect this directly to your flow meter and then connect your flow meter to your cylinder. So this is what your setup will look like from a standard rental cylinder, and this is what your setup will look like from an Albi cylinder. Next on the agenda is your TIG torch. Now, I've disassembled mine just to kind of give you an idea of what yours might look like when your machine arrives. So all it is I've got a flexi head on the top, which means it can be bent into different positions whilst you're welding. And then you'll have this little plastic backer. That's what contains your tungsten electrode. You'll have a piece of ceramic called a cup. Yours might look different to this because this is a gas lens. Now, a gas lens is slightly different to a standard setup. It is a minor upgrade. Sometimes it comes with your machine, sometimes it doesn't. However, all it basically does is reduces turbulence in your gas flow. You'll also have a little copper collet. What this does is it grips the tungsten and allows for a good connection so that your power can run through it. You will then, of course, need some tungstens. Depending on what type of welding you're doing, will depend on what tungsten electrode you go for. Make sure it's nice and sharp. Now, if you don't have a gas lens, let's see if I've got one. I've got some old bits and bobs here that I could show you. Hopefully I've got my original. Yes, I do. Your setup may look like this. You'll still have a cup, although it will be slightly longer. And then you'll also have this kind of arrangement. And this is where your gas leaves your torch, filling your cup and falling over your weld pool. For a standard setup, your cup screws on to your bit in like so. And then this fits in your torch like that. For a gas lens setup, it's a similar thing. Your gas lens and your cup screw together like so, and then your cup screws into the flexi head of the torch just like that. Then you'll have your copper tungsten holder or collet. Pop that in there like this in the back, so you'll want the sort of pointy grippy end down. Pop that in like so, it'll just drop in. You'll have your little backer, stick that in there. Don't tighten it up too much. You can then stick your tungsten electrode straight in through the front. Now, tungsten electrodes do come in different types. Some are mildly radioactive, which improve arc stability and arc control and other characteristics, whereas others aren't, and they're a little safer to use. No matter what tungsten electrode you use, make sure that you dispose of them correctly and you wear the correct PPE when you're sharpening them. If you tighten this up, it'll grip in and your tungsten electrode will be held firmly in place. Now, the amount of stick out that you have will depend on what joint you're doing, but a good rule of thumb is half the diameter or the radius of the cup size. That's a good starting point. Go from there. Now that your torch is set up, it's time to discuss what all of these knobs and buttons do. Your setup may look different to this. You might have a digital readout with lots of buttons, or you might have a simple one like mine that has some dials and other switches on it. Now, there are a couple of main ones. Yours might have all of the modern bells and whistles, but for now, I want you to keep it simple. Settings like pulse TIG won't make you a better welder without practicing. It's not a cheat code. These are for specific situations. There are no shortcuts with learning how to weld. Now, we already discussed that our welder is set up in DC electrode negative. The next one we want to discuss is the amperage dial. Now, you will have to get used to changing this, and it will come with experience. You'll change your amperage depending on your material thickness, what sort of joint you're producing. So it really is something that you will learn to do. If you're welding 1 mil, maybe maybe start at 40. If you're welding 2mm, you could pump it up to 60 depending on what joint. This is something that comes with experience. If you have a foot pedal, how deep you press that pedal and what range to set it in. Your welder may be a lift TIG only model. What lift TIG essentially is where you will have to touch your tungsten electrode to your base material in order to initiate the arc. Modern machines have something called high frequency, and if you have it, I would recommend that you turn it on. It'll have a little Harry Potter kind of scar electrical symbol on the diagram and switch it to that. This will send out high frequency, high voltage pulse in order to initiate the arc. That means that you don't need to dirty up your tungsten touching it to your base material. Another setting that involves your torch is telling the machine what you want it to do when you press the button. Do you want to initiate welding by pressing the button? Then welding continues until you press the button again and then it stops. If so, you'll have a diagram that has 2 arrows pointing back and forth like this. Select that. However, if you're like me and you like to tell the welder that when the button is pressed and held down, that's when we weld, and the moment you release it, that's when you stop welding, then select the other one, which is 1 arrow pointing up and 1 pointing down. Next, I have a dial for pre-flow and post-flow. This tells the welder how long you want your gas to be flowing before and after the arc is initiated. Now, you need gas to be flowing beforehand so that your weld pool, when it starts to form, already has gas coverage, because if it doesn't, you're going to get defects like porosity as your weld material begins to react with the gases in the atmosphere. This is also the case at the end when you've finished welding, whilst your new weld bead is still hot. Post-flow will protect it as it begins to cool down. This is the same for your tungsten electrode. You don't want this oxidizing either. Your post-flow will protect it as it's still unstable due to heat. Now let's get to laying your first bead, and you'll need some practice material. Scrap is okay to use, but the inconsistency in thickness that you receive, or the general quality, the scale, and also it might be slightly rusty or oxidized, all of these things can affect your weld quality. And when you're practicing, you want as best conditions as possible in order for you to pick up this skill without any hindrance. So I would recommend that you purchase welding blanks or welding coupons. Now, these are specifically sized pieces of prepped material for common joints that you'll encounter when you're TIG welding. If you want to purchase some, follow the link in the description. There's also a list in there of common joints that you'll encounter during your time welding or during a weld test, so you'll want to practice those. You might be a bit further along than just practicing joints and you want to learn through experience, so I've put together some downloadable content in the form of plans and drawings that are perfect for beginner TIG welders. Again, find those in the description. I can already tell you 5 reasons why you're not progressing at TIG welding, and to hear those, watch this video here. Enjoy!